My name is Tricia Beretta, and I'm a major advocate for free press, free expression. I believe there's a reason why it's the First Amendment. Julian Assange is the hero of press freedom, speech freedom, and they're coming after him. He's done no crime other than to keep the public informed of what a really corrupt government is doing, both sides, the Democrats and the Republicans. And people don't want to know, and it's shoot the messenger, and it shouldn't be. We need to pay attention and free Julian Assange.
Gil Frischman. I'm just here to support Julian and the Fourth Estate, which no longer exists and is absolutely necessary to freedom. I can't, that's it.
I'm Judy Lewis, and I'm here to support Julian Assange, and he should be free. He should be getting a Pulitzer Prize like everyone else who did this before him, and I won't rest until he's free.
Hi, I'm Lori Tooker, and I'm here to support the First Amendment and Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. What Ecuador is proposing to do is against their constitution and against international law, as well as what the UK is doing if they extradite him to the United States. And so I'm here to defend the rights of the powerless against the powerful.
My name is Carolyn, and I'm a Socialist Equality Party supporter, the World Socialist website. And this attacks on Julian Assange, he is a hero for exposing the war crimes of the United States and NATO against the countries in the Middle East and around the world. And he is being punished for that, and the American government is trying to extradite him because they would like to see him dead. And I oppose that with every fiber of my being.
My name is Carol Seligman, and I'm an editor of Socialist Viewpoint. And the cause of Julian Assange is the cause of the First Amendment and freedom of the press and human rights around the world, because he's exposed the U.S. assault on human rights by WikiLeaks leaking of all the different documents that show where what has happened and what the government has perpetrated.
Hi, my name is Clark Sullivan. I'm an independent live streamer. I come out here in support of Julian. Because out of all the news people that have released all this information, he's been 100% real. Everybody else is broadcasting fake news or whatever. He's not adhering to any kind of political agenda or, other than to the free release of information. And it's important that we support whistleblowers in society because sometimes that's the only way that we know. That's the only way that we know of things that are going on. Like with Chelsea Manning, when she so bravely released all those Iraqi tapes, we would have never known what the horrors that would have went on in the Iraqi war unless she would have released those videos. So it's really important as a society that we support people who are whistleblowers.
WikiLeaks that John Podesta and Carolyn Lerner, who runs the Office of Special Counsel, which is supposed to investigate and prosecute corruption in the U.S. government, they were colluding together to allow corruption in the U.S. government. So he found that out as a result of WikiLeaks. Proof positive that actually WikiLeaks and what Julian Assange has done is helping journalists, is helping whistleblowers. So we have to stand with the whistleblowers, we have to stand with the journalists, and we have to demand that he be free and that he not be attacked by the U.S. government, by the British government, and by the Ecuadorian government. This is Randy Credico, who's a journalist in New York, and he has been active internationally in supporting Julian Assange. Welcome, Randy Credico. Randy.
I want to thank everybody for being out there for Julian. This is a very noble and important effort. Well, it's like the most important case in decades since Pentagon Papers. If they get Julian Assange, who's next? KPFA, KPFK, WBAI? Everybody needs to circle the wagons around Julian Assange right now, because this would be a major blow. This would gut what's left of Julian Assange is an accurate reporter. He's a journalist. He has exposed corruption. He has exposed torture. He has exposed war. Things that we did not know about the mainstream media. If not for Julian Assange, we would be ignorant of some of the war crimes committed by U.S., NATO, and other countries involved in Saudi Arabia, Israel. Julian Assange holds a mirror, and he is one of the most important journalists to come around in decades. So it is really important that we support him, to support the First Amendment, support the free press, the free flow of information. Mr. Assange is almost in a martyr-like state. He's been in there for 6 years. Right now it's a heat wave in London. I've been in there 3 times. I can tell you the quarters are very cramped and the walls are thick, and it's not very humane what he has gone through. He's been basically persecuted now for 6 years. And the main reason, because he is a journalist that has exposed corruption, torture, and crimes against humanity.
Okay, well, I want to thank you very much, Randy. Solidarity and free Julian Assange! 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 Justice. He was involved in preventing an investigation of corruption right here in San Francisco at OSHA, where the whistleblower protection program was. And Darrell Whitman was fighting for whistleblowers. He was fighting for health and safety, and he was attacked and bullied along with other lawyers at the office, the federal office. So here's his statement.
This is Dr. Darrell Whitman. This is my statement in support of Julian Assange. The continuing threats to Julian Assange are an offense to decency and justice. Those who issue these threats are our enemy, using the power of the corporate state and its camp followers in the deep state and media to obscure their true intentions. The attacks are not on Julian Assange the man, but on democracy and the people's right to know what their governments are doing. And the evil of what they are doing thrives in the darkness they protect. 6 years ago, when I first began to challenge corruption in the federal government, I didn't know that same government was secretly monitoring my and every American's activities. We only learned about that because Julian Assange and WikiLeaks gave Ed Snowden the opportunity to tell us. We didn't know about corrupt schemes of the super rich to spirit away their stolen money until we read about it when Julian Assange and WikiLeaks published the Panama Papers. These revelations earned Assange and WikiLeaks the hatred of powerful criminals, which are heavily invested in corrupting governments all over the world. In the summer of 2016, Assange and WikiLeaks earned the hatred of a new class of criminals, the corrupt masters of the Democratic Party, when they published the John Podesta emails. These emails revealed not only the manipulation of the Democratic Party, but the extension of that corruption into the very heart of our government. When I read about the connections between Podesta and Carolyn Lerner, the head of the Federal Office of Special Counsel, I began to connect the dots between the corruption inside the government and the corruption outside the government. Once those dots connected, I saw the depth and breadth of the corruption and how it presented a direct assault on our constitutional democracy. Without Assange and WikiLeaks, we are blind. We must now act to protect him and those who work with him in WikiLeaks because they are essential to protecting us. Julian should be free to leave the Ecuadorian embassy on his own terms, as the European Court of Justice has declared. And rather than threats, Julian and WikiLeaks should be lauded as the defenders of democracy that they are. Today, I proudly stand with Julian and all other whistleblowers who have put their selfish interests aside to protect their families, friends, fellow workers, and communities by standing up for truth and justice. Freedom for Julian Assange. Justice for all whistleblowers.
Co-hosted one organization, United Public Workers for Action, and George Wright, who is a professor, retired professor, is going to speak on this case. Welcome, George.
But I think there are a couple of points that I'd like to think is very important. First of all, in the 1960s, we had lots of heroes, Che, Fidel, Malcolm X, Dr. King, etc. There aren't very many heroes in this country or around the world today, but I assure you that Julian Assange is a hero, and we must look at him in those terms. Secondly, why is he being persecuted? He's being persecuted, obviously, for exposing the lies and the criminality of the United States government over the last 50 years or so, and he has to be made example of by the ruling powers. There is a visceral hatred towards Julian Assange. But the third point I want to make is it's not just Julian Assange who is being persecuted. He is also an example to the rest of us. It is a means to intimidate us, to frighten us, to shut us up, so that we don't speak out as well. So we have to realize that he is a symbol for justice, democracy, civil liberties, and civil rights in this country. I think the fourth point is there's a big picture behind this as well that's geopolitical, that is going somewhat ignored in the discussion. One, in 2012, Rafael Correa, who was considered kind of a liberal left leader in Ecuador, had the guts, if you will, to allow Julian Assange to have asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. Correa represented a window that occurred in the 2000s, partly because the United States was so focused on the Middle East, that allowed a space in Latin America for the Bolivarian Revolution to make inroads. But since 2009, there's been a systematic move by the U.S. imperialists to reverse the Bolivarian Revolution, no matter how limited that revolution was. We could see the litany in front of us. Honduras in 2009, Brazil, Venezuela, Nicaragua is going on right now, a story that's not covered very well, etc. The current president in Ecuador, ironically, is named Lerner. I can't believe it, Moreno, and he represents this backlash to the Bolivarian Revolution. And so at the moment, he's involved in discussions with the British officials in the United States to create a process to extradite Julian Assange eventually back to the United States for the kangaroo trial and the murder or execution they plan on him. So we have to realize it's just not Assange. There is a massive picture of geopolitics and the shift to the right that the U.S. is fostering and promoting and carrying out. Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! Defend Julian Assange! Defend Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! Defend Julian Assange! Defend Julian Assange! Thank you. Thank you.
Do you remember a certain video released by a soldier, Bradley Manning, who is now Chelsea Manning, called Collateral Murder? You remember that? That was released by WikiLeaks, and it exposed what the Iraq War was to the American people and the people of the world, which was a slaughter of Iraqi civilians and media. Children were killed in the collateral murder, what the collateral murder video showed. And Chelsea Manning spent many years in prison for having released that to Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. And that's what they want to do too. This person, Julian Assange, he's a hero, because to release information that tells what U.S. war is all about, which is slaughter of civilians in order to control the resources of their country, that is the lesson that the American people need to learn, because I don't think the American people, if they knew that, would go for it. And there was massive opposition to the Iraq War, not quite enough to stop it, but the beginnings of a true mass movement against the war. And we can thank WikiLeaks and we can thank Julian Assange for it. He shouldn't be punished. He should be cheered. He should be celebrated. He's a hero. And he's an example for media all over the world.
I'm a member of the Media Workers Union here. I used to work at the Chronicle, not as a journalist, but as a printer for about 20 years. So I'm a member of the Retirees Club of Bay Area Typographic 21, which merged into our Media Workers Union. Now, Julian Assange, sorry I got here a bit late. I hope I'm not repeating things other speakers have said, but Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks, is trapped in the Ecuadoran embassy, as you've all heard, where he sought asylum in 2012 after Swedish prosecutors demanded his extradition on completely phony charges of rape. Despite the fact that over a year ago the Swedish prosecutors dropped these phony charges, nonetheless, London police have said they would arrest Assange for leaving allegedly for skipping bail on charges that have been dropped. Okay, really strange, huh? And the pressure is now on tiny Ecuador from England and the United States of America to kick him out. At which point, Britain would do what U.S. authorities have wanted all along, which is, and which the Americans, the Brits, and the Swedes all used to deny they had any interest in doing, and pack him off to the United States for charges for the real reasons that they're out to get him. Now, I'm a retired printer, not a journalist, but my father was an AP journalist and a member of our union, and also I've done a bit of writing myself, and also I teach at history at some colleges around here. And I've done some internet research on the rape case, which I don't know if people discussed this already, but people need to understand. People need to understand just how phony these charges were. The accusations spread all over the media, which impressed even various leftists, were a perfect example of what is referred to as fake news. And let me explain why. This is particularly important for people to understand in this era of Me Too, where a lot of people believe that anyone charged with rape and sexual harassment is automatically guilty and is guilty and can be presumed guilty. So people need to understand what's going on here. These charges were so phony that for 5 years the Swedish prosecutors refused to even interview Assange unless he would surrender himself to Swedish authorities. At which point, after perfunctory review of the charges and dismissal, he could be handed over to the CIA, basically. Okay. One of the accusers turned out to be a cousin of the commander of Swedish forces in Afghanistan. Okay, and for good measure, had been involved in CIA-backed efforts against Cuba. Okay. And I think it's a pretty good guess that her relationship with Assange is a classic example of what they call the spy game, the honeypot. And for those of you who don't know what that is, look it up on the internet. Okay? Now, it would be hard to prove that I suspect that the scheme to victimize Assange came from the fine pseudo-feminist hand of the then head of the State Department, Hillary Rodham Clinton. Okay? Now, and then there's the other accuser. Before she hooked up with Assange, she had been a rock star groupie in Lou Reed's entourage, who apparently decided to get into Julian Assange's entourage. She tried to withdraw the charges that Ms. 007 had talked her into filing, and the Swedish authorities wouldn't let her do that. Okay? So that's, so anyway, so why were the charges finally dropped a year ago? Because they served their purpose. Okay? Now it's upfront and open that it wasn't the phony rape charges that the Swedes were going after for WikiLeaks exposure of the crimes of U.S. imperialism that I'm sure you've already heard something about here today. Okay? Sweden being a U.S. lapdog. Those Swedish soldiers in Afghanistan were supposedly there to defend women's rights, you know. Okay? Right? Sure. Now, so now liberals and conservatives are baying for Assange's blood side by side. The liberals want him arrested for allegedly helping Donald Trump get elected by revealing Hillary Clinton's dirty dealings to the world. Even before the outbreak of conspiracy mongering over alleged Russian interference in our wonderful American elections, from which blacks and Latinos get excluded from by every trick in the book. Okay, liberals consider Assange dangerous, because unlike legitimate mainstream mouthpieces like the New York Times, he refuses to redact the material that WikiLeaks published. He releases every dirty detail of American crimes, even if it reveals what U.S. intelligence operatives are up to, those intelligence agencies that liberals have fallen in love with over the last year or so, what they're up to in other countries. Now, Democrats came to despise Assange even more, of course, after WikiLeaks released a trove of emails last year, allegedly hacked by the Russians, so the story goes, from the Hillary Clinton presidential campaign, which supposedly is the only reason why Trump won the presidency, right? Since the election, Democrats have pulled out all the stops in an effort to persuade the world that we was robbed by an attack of hackers operating under the command of Putin, with the intent of undermining American democracy by electing his Manchurian candidate puppet, Donald Trump, right? Their proof, by the way, for any of you who paid much attention, was a gilt-edged report prepared by the CIA, the FBI, and the National Security Agency, supposedly tracked the chain of command for this bizarre conspiracy all the way up to the Kremlin. Except none of the evidence for this wild conspiracy theory got released to the public because it's all top secret, you see. And if anyone here believes that, there's a really nice bridge in Brooklyn I'd really like to sell you. Cheap! Okay? Okay? All right, so now Donald Trump and the so-called anti-Trump resistance are united in trying to get the CIA's hands of Assange so he'll be packed out to Guantanamo and tortured to reveal all of WikiLeaks secrets. Okay? In this unholy alliance, you have Trump and the alt-right fascist fringe he has nurtured, whipping up hatred of Mexican and Muslim foreigners based on racism and crazy conspiracy theories. And the Democrats, seeing that xenophobia was a winning card for Trump in the elections, are whipping up hatred of Russians based on leftover Cold War anti-communism and equally crazy conspiracy theories. And both sides are united to shut the mouths of truth-tellers like Julian Assange. By unmasking the people who run this country's everyday lies, intrigues, and wanton slaughter, brave whistleblowers like Chelsea Manning, Edward Snowden, and Julian Assange have done a great service to the entire world. Hands off Julian Assange!
Hands off Julian Assange! From comrades in Australia with ClassConscious.org in Australia who said that they would like to be here if they could, but they sent a statement. This important rally is a step in the international struggle to free Julian in defending this courageous journalist who has consistently fought to expose the truth we are defending our right to know. The WikiLeaks revelations have exposed the true character of governments around the world in revealing the facts of their criminal conduct. Thus, the fight to defend Julian is part and parcel of the broader struggle to defend democratic rights against war and against censorship. There are credible reports that the Ecuadoran government reneged on a political asylum Julian was granted earlier, and that he may be removed from the embassy in the coming period. Yet the Australian government refused to use its diplomatic power to intervene on Julian's behalf to uphold his rights and promote his welfare. This is business as usual for the ruling class. They do not respect the rights of asylum. The Australian government has established a precedent in its cruel treatment of asylum seekers fleeing war and persecution in their home countries. They are routinely denied their fundamental democratic rights through the Pacific Solution, whereby the boats used for the dangerous ocean crossing to Australia are intercepted by the Navy and taken to be indefinitely detained in third countries and prison camps. Rather than fairly processing their asylum applications, they are held in a deliberately punitive system, held as an example in inhumane conditions to deter others from seeking asylum in Australia. The Australian government does not respect the rights of asylum for the refugees, nor does it respect Julian's right to asylum. These cruel people do not deserve to govern. Their crimes are too great. The poor treatment of refugees and the persecution of Assange show the necessity of developing an international-based ongoing campaign in defense of all democratic rights. From this rally, we must move to build this campaign with links with politically progressive elements as an important step. Urgent protests are currently being organized in many countries to respond when Assange is evicted from the Ecuador's London embassy. Please check our website for further details. Thank you, brothers and sisters from Australia, for your support. Yay. This is an international campaign, and all these criminal governments who are terrorizing. Our next speaker is Ann Garrison, and she's an independent journalist at KPFA and an internationalist. Welcome, Ann Garrison.
Julian Assange said that justice is the goal, transparency is the method. He has shown us the inner workings of the global power elite, and he has used his genius, absolute genius, to explain the implications of advancing technology for both privacy and information control. If you go on the web and find something called the Holberg debate, you'll listen to him describing a kind of information control in the future that is absolutely terrifying. A use of all the information that the various tech giants have been able to collect about us to control what we see on the web. So, as I said at the end of my piece last week, I wish Julian Assange could just upload his astonishing brain onto the internet and vanish for a while. But Ecuador has cut off his internet access, so that's out of the question. We have to keep talking, writing, broadcasting, doing whatever we can, because his contribution to all of us is enormous.
Thank you, Anne. Free Julian now! Free Julian now! So our next speaker is another journalist. Welcome, Mehmet.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming today. I'd just like to say that what we usually say, an attack on one is an attack on all. Today we have to realize how true, how valid this statement is. I am originally from Turkey, and I'm a journalist here. I was a journalist in Turkey. The attack on Julian Assange is not an attack on one person. When Julian Assange goes down, the whole journalism goes down. We cannot again look for an objective journalism once we give Julian Assange to CIA, to the US government. It's all over with. I have lived this personally in Turkey. Today, more than 170 journalists are in prison, and one of them was even convicted, not because what he published. The government hacked into his computer, and because he was writing a book, it's not published, it's not finished yet, and they got him in prison for more than 2 years for something he was writing on his personal computer. If we give Julian Assange, then we have to say yes to these kind of experiences. So we are going down the path under Trump administration and with the deep state that wants Julian Assange gone. We are going down the path that Turkey has gone down with. Nobody in the Turkish press now can even bring a criticism. Every single one who criticized the government is in prison, and all others have given up. They are talking about penguins, they are talking about the weather, but not a single word on what the government is doing. So if we give up on Julian Assange, we are giving up on the basic rights of our nation, basic rights of what we have, and forget about ever getting a reliable, objective news, ever. So we have to stand with Julian Assange. He represents us, we represent him. So this fight has to go on. Julian Assange has to be freed, and we have to support with other journalists and whistleblowers who tell us the crimes behind the scenes. Because of Julian Assange, we know the crimes that have happened. Without that, we may have been sitting today thinking, oh, well, the government had a right to bomb Iraq. No. Julian Assange showed that these were all lies, and that's why he's being punished. So we need to stand with him. Free Julian Assange.
So the chorus goes, they never change, they never change, they shoot us down without shame. Gigi. They never change, they never change, it's that same old capitalist game. This is about the whole world. Thousands of families poisoned in Flint, Michigan. Thousands of families poisoned in Flint, Michigan. Time to raise the banner of resistance, join that fight once again. They never change, they never change. It's that same old dirty, rotten, low-down enemy of Julian Assange, enemy of the world, working people, and enemy of all the journalists in the world that want to point out the real truth of this rotten, dirty, low-down capitalist game.
Is organizing for emergency vigils in case Ecuador does give Julian up to the UK. So if any of you guys know where you'd like to meet, I would think the UK consulate would be the place. There's a Facebook page called Free Julian Assange Now, which is where it can be posted. So as soon as, God forbid, something like that were to happen, it would be on that Facebook page, and you would know to come to it.
Free Julian Assange! 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 The main government is a criminal government. They're liars and they're corrupt. This government is covering up for war crimes like the American government. This is not new. They have a history of war crimes. So we're saying here today that we put the government on charges of criminal conspiracy to silence Julian Assange. Why do they want him silenced? They want him silenced because he's telling the truth about the role of the United States and Britain. They want him silenced because he's exposing the banks like Citibank and other corrupt banks that are stealing from the people of the world. You want to know why there's a financial crisis? These banks are part of the financial crisis. They're a bunch of thieves, and the Panama Papers show that. The banks were involved in criminal activity to steal billions of dollars and trillions of dollars. We're saying free Julian. There's massive union busting going on by these governments, by the U.S. government, against workers in this country. They're trying to break all unions. There's massive crimes against poor people. There are murders against African Americans. There's massive crime against working people in this country. We have to put a halt to it. That's why we have to defend Julian Assange, because he's released the emails, he's released the information about what's going on.
Hey.
Okay.
Hey, this song was written for the music. Yeah, I'm going to need it.
Okay.
Here's what I'm going to need to do. I'm going to need to start on 1. And then I'm going to need to go to 2. And then I'm going to need to go 3, 4, 5.
Can't see with my glasses.
A lot of work for you, huh?
Okay.
Thank you, Ginger. So here we go. Song written by Jorma Jorinen. This is not going to work. Jorma Jorinen, yeah. From a group called Emmaus Children in Finland, but he wrote it in English for us. I heard the news just yesterday, they've taken you away to be extradited to the USA. They say it's to Sweden that they're going to take you first, but the Yankees are pressing hard for revenge, is what they thirst. They persecute your website and they kill your funding too. This simply isn't anything they wouldn't hesitate to do. They've used bullets, bombs, and napalm to get rid of those they hate. They're willing to use all of these things to seal up your fate. They'll be doing all they can to lock truth up in jail. But what their efforts will come down to is one big fail. Next line.
But no matter
Keep going, please. Take me to 3. Right here, please.
Oh.
They claim that you are raping unionists, but we know that that's not true. Instead, the cause for all of this is what you and others do. To spread the word about nasty deeds, to spill their beans big time. To tear the veil of secrecy that's covering up their crimes. If you lived in China, we all know what that would mean. You would get a Nobel Prize and your own limousine. And lots of good publicity for doing the right thing. You be taking on America, that's the biggest sin. They say that you're a menace to society for delivering them this blow. Revealing what the ruling class doesn't want the people to know. These Hillarys and wannabes and Trump we see want you dead. But even if they succeeded in cutting off your head, they couldn't turn the tide around. The system's cracking at the seams. You can always kill a man, but you can never kill his dreams.